There's a kind of man who's always tired, though he sleeps, always wired, though nothing moves. He wakes up with that same quiet ache behind his ribs, not pain, not grief, just that dull emptiness he's stopped trying to name. So he reaches for a screen, a window into a world where no one rejects him, where no woman leaves him waiting, where he doesn't have to ask. In that digital silence, there are no failures, just release. For a moment it feels like control, but it isn't. Zeno once gave us a metaphor: the dog tied to the moving cart. He can resist, drag his paws against the dirt, bite at the leash, but he'll still be dragged. The wise man walks with the cart. The fool gets torn apart by the path he refuses. And that's what this is. Compulsive masturbation isn't about desire. It's about resistance. Resistance to the loneliness you haven't faced. Resistance to the silence that now feels unbearable. Resistance to the mirror that stopped showing you a man you admire. You feed the illusion, because the truth would ask something of you, something real, something harder. Marcus Aurelius warned of the soul that wastes itself in random pleasures, the energy of the man scattered, chasing heat without fire. When you indulge repeatedly in something that gives nothing back, your core begins to dull. Your clarity weakens. You lose the power to hold tension, the very essence of masculine presence. What once created focus, direction, and presence becomes consumption, reaction, escape. You weren't made to devour. You were made to withstand, and now you're shrinking under the weight of your own release. The real damage isn't what you watch. It's not even the act. It's what you trade for it. The moment of strength you never accessed, the breath of silence you never held, the part of you that needed to sit still and burn, but instead escaped. Each time you give in to the same cycle, you're not satisfying a need. You're silencing a message, and your body remembers. Your mind remembers. The dignity you once felt, it fades in fractions, not all at once, but quietly, silently, like a man disappearing from his own reflection. This video isn't about shame. It isn't a moral lesson, and it's not here to punish you. It's here to confront the reality you already feel, that something is off, that you've been showing up with less presence, less edge, less fire, that you've been performing the motions of masculinity without the energy behind it. This isn't about abstinence for purity. It's about abstinence for clarity, for stillness, for power. Masturbation, when driven by compulsion, becomes a ritual of avoidance, not satisfaction, not relief, just another way to mute the voice inside you that's begging to be heard. You think you're in control, but control without command is just a leash with no destination. And the longer you follow that loop, the further you drift from the man you once knew how to be. So we begin here, not in judgment, but in silence. You don't have to speak, just listen. Listen to what your silence has been trying to say all along. It starts in moments no one sees, late at night, after a long day, after rejection, after silence. You tell yourself it's harmless, that it's natural, that it's better than chasing someone who doesn't want you. And on the surface, that's true. But beneath it, quietly over time, something begins to shift. You stop reaching for the harder rewards. You stop sitting in your own stillness. You stop commanding your energy and start leaking it. The brain doesn't forget patterns. It carves paths. Dopamine, the signal of pursuit, purpose, and presence, becomes hijacked by repetition, by shortcuts. You train yourself to crave the easy reward, not the earned one. And the damage isn't just in the act, it's in what you stop striving for. You begin to feel less hungry, less dangerous, less creative. Your masculine drive, once wired for direction, becomes diluted in false satisfaction. You think you're choosing pleasure, but you're actually avoiding absence. There's a hollow in your life, a truth you haven't faced, a pain you haven't named. And every time you self-soothe with release, you bury it a little deeper. You're not addicted to sex. You're addicted to silence avoidance, to the illusion that you're okay because you got by for one more night. Zeno didn't teach men to run from desire. He taught them to discipline it, to train it like a weapon, like a horse that carries the warrior, not drags him. When you let desire control you, it doesn't make you more free, it makes you more hidden. And the worst part is, you can look perfectly fine on the outside. You still work, you still smile. But deep inside, there's a fracture, a split between who you are and who you know you could be. That fracture is what kills your dignity, not all at once, but piece by piece. Every time you choose escape over effort, every time you settle for sensation over growth, every time you reward yourself for surviving the day instead of creating something with it. And you know it. You can feel it, that quiet guilt that lingers, not because you did something wrong, but because you did something small when you were built for something larger. This habit doesn't destroy you with a bang. It dissolves you in silence, not because of what it gives you, but because of what it takes away. Your drive, your edge, your reason to fight. That's what's being lost. Not your masculinity, but your movement. And without movement, there is no man. Only memory. You think she doesn't know. You think she can't feel it, that it's private. Yours. Just a habit behind closed doors. But energy doesn't lie. A woman doesn't need to see the screen. She feels the absence, the drop in presence, the shift in your edge. It's not something you say. It's something you no longer carry. When you indulge in self-release to numb, not to connect, something quiet leaves your body. A tension, a stillness, a magnetic weight she once leaned into without knowing why. That energy, the unspoken pressure behind your words, the fullness behind your silence, is what creates masculine presence. And when it's gone, she doesn't feel less attracted. She feels less safe, less held, less seen. You don't need to be muscular, rich, or loud to command respect. But you do need to hold energy, not spill it, not offer it to pixels, not trade it for 2 seconds of dopamine. And that's what most men don't realize. Every time you self-indulge to escape your own emotional weather, you weaken the field around you. You become energetically thin, less grounded, less sovereign. It shows in your posture, in your eyes, in the way your words land with less weight. After the screen, after the moment passes, your body may feel calm, but your presence shrinks. And she senses it, not consciously, but biologically. Something in her stops softening around you, stops trusting, stops leaning in, because you stopped being a container. You became scattered, fragmented, flat. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of the man he hides from himself, hoping the world doesn't notice, but they do. Women feel it in your hesitation, in your sudden lack of direction, in the way you look at her with hunger, but without the depth of command, because you've already given your essence away, and now there's nothing left but performance. This isn't about purity, it's about power. She doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs you to be full, and every time you indulge that impulse without intention, you leak the very tension that made her want to trust you in the first place. The tension of a man who doesn't run from his need, but owns it, holds it, channels it. You think she doesn't know, but she does. Maybe not with words, but in her body, in her silence, in the way she stops responding. Not because she doesn't love you, but because she can no longer feel you. It feels like choice. It feels like safety. No drama, no rejection, no risk. You tell yourself it's discipline, that you're avoiding trouble, that you're making the smarter call. You're not chasing strangers. You're not cheating. You're in control, but that control is thin, hollow, the kind that breaks under pressure. Because real freedom doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from choosing your pain, with clarity, with intention. The moment you tell yourself, at least I'm not cheating, you're already trying to outrun something inside you, a need you haven't faced, a loneliness you haven't named. You turned abstinence into avoidance, and avoidance into a badge of honor. But there's nothing noble in hiding from your own desire. Stoic masculinity was never about cutting yourself off from life. It was about directing life, about holding fire without burning your hands, not locking it in a drawer and pretending it isn't there. Freedom isn't the absence of temptation. It's the strength to face it, and still choose direction over indulgence. And that's the slavery most men fall into. Not to women, not to lust, but to the fear of their own emotional chaos. So they numb, they scroll, they press play, again and again, until the screen becomes safer than the mirror. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the power to choose your response." But when you indulge in compulsion, you lose that power before the choice even begins. You don't respond, you react, and you call it coping. You call it self-care. But deep down, you know when your choices stop being free, when they become reflex, when they become ritual, when they become escape. And here's the truth. Discipline isn't sterile. It isn't cold. It's sacred. The man who can sit in his own discomfort without needing to pacify it is the man who can walk through any fire and not lose himself. You don't have to stop needing. You just have to stop needing quickly. Stop needing easily. Stop needing secretly. What you call freedom may be nothing more than a cage made of convenience. The door isn't locked, but you haven't left in years, not because you can't, but because comfort seduced you into calling it home. And now, every time you reach for release, you're deepening the groove, digging the path, slipping the leash back on. Not because you're weak, but because you've forgotten what strength actually feels like. It doesn't feel like escape. It feels like staying with yourself, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That's where your freedom is buried, and only you can dig it out. There was a time when your days had structure, when your mornings started with intention, when you looked ahead and saw the next step, the next build, the next version of yourself forming. You were not perfect, but you were moving. And then, without notice, something shifted. Not all at once, but slowly, subtly. You started skipping the gym, skipping the plan, skipping the mirror, not because you didn't care, but because you stopped feeling like you were worth showing up for. That's what this habit does. Not in the act itself, but in the erosion it causes when repeated without reverence. Pornography doesn't just take your attention, it changes the direction of your instinct, from creation to consumption, from movement to stagnation, from leading the story to reacting to someone else's script. The masculine archetype was never designed to sit back and receive pleasure without effort. He was made to pursue, to initiate, to embody direction. And now you hesitate to even open the notebook where you used to dream. The most dangerous thing about self-gratification is how quietly it replaces your identity. At first, it's just relief. Then it becomes habit, then routine, then your default way of coping. And before you realize it, the man who once had fire in his chest now lives in the shadows of who he used to be. You still have his name, but not his edge, not his focus, not his weight in the room. This isn't about morality, it's about memory. The memory of the man you once admired, the one who could sit in boredom and still write, who could sit in frustration and still lift, who could sit in silence and still breathe. But now, your body has learned that discomfort means distraction, that loneliness means stimulation, that longing means release. You've taught yourself to escape the exact moment that could have shaped you. You didn't lose yourself in one decision. You lost yourself by slowly handing over your authority, one indulgence at a time, not because you failed, but because you forgot how much you were worth building. The saddest part isn't that others stopped seeing you. It's that you stopped seeing yourself. You became replaceable to your own mission, to your own path, to your own presence. But you are still in there, beneath the screen, beneath the numbness, beneath the reflex. The man who doesn't chase pleasure but builds meaning. The one who doesn't avoid pain but transforms it. He's not gone. He's waiting. He always has been, but he won't fight for your attention. He'll wait in the silence until you decide to remember. Children don't need explanations. They don't need confessions. They don't need evidence. They feel before they speak, before they understand. They feel who's present. They feel who's still carrying weight. And they feel when something in their father has gone quiet. Not the good kind of silence, but the kind that signals absence. You think you've hidden it well. You tell yourself it's private, that it doesn't affect anyone else. But the masculine energy you carry or leak becomes the atmosphere your son breathes. Not because you raised your voice, not because he saw anything explicit, but because your presence no longer anchors the room like it used to. There's a tension he can't name, and a distance he doesn't understand. Zeno taught that true philosophy isn't spoken, it's lived. You don't teach masculinity to your son by the things you say. You teach it by how you carry yourself when no one is watching, by how you respond when the world pulls you toward numbness, by whether you hold tension or escape it. That quiet discipline, felt but not flaunted, is the legacy you leave in him. And when compulsive behaviors start to define your evenings, your energy changes. You may still show up, but something's off. Your irritability is sharper, your patience thinner, your eyes dimmer. Not every day, but enough for him to notice, enough for him to feel that you're here, but not fully. You laugh, but you're distracted. You sit, but your mind is somewhere else. And he carries that confusion like weight he doesn't know he's lifting. You're not failing him, but something is drifting. And it's not because of what you do. it's because of what you withhold. The full presence of a man who's not hiding. The stillness of a father who has tamed his storms, not silenced them, tamed them. That's what makes a boy feel safe. That's what teaches him how to suffer without surrendering. This isn't about guilt. It's about awareness. Because your presence isn't just a gift. It's a signal. It tells him, you can trust me. You can lean here. I'm not running from myself, so you don't have to either. But if all he feels is your body in the room and your spirit somewhere else, he learns to mimic that same fracture. And it doesn't take long for that to become his language too. The father who hides doesn't teach protection. He teaches disappearance. But the father who sits in his own unrest and refuses to escape becomes a pillar. Quiet, unshakable, present, not perfect, but real. That's what he needs. That's what he remembers. Not your advice, but your stillness, your gravity, your choice to stay with yourself, so that one day, he knows how to stay with his own. There's a moment, right before you reach for it, where something inside you hesitates. A pause, a whisper, a flicker of clarity. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't yell. It just lingers, like a question you're not ready to answer. That moment is your chance, not to resist the urge, but to hear what it's trying to cover. And yet, instead of listening, you mute it. Again, Viktor Frankl spoke of a space between stimulus and response, a sacred space, a pause that holds the possibility of growth, direction, freedom. But when you train your body to reach for release at the first sign of discomfort, you erase that space. You live in reaction, not reflection. And that's where the real damage lies. Not in the action itself, but in the death of that pause, in the silencing of that inner signal that once told you who you are. You weren't looking for orgasm, you were looking for stillness, but the kind of stillness that doesn't come from escape. It comes from presence, from being able to sit with your own soul and not flinch, to feel the ache and stay, to feel the pull and not move. That's what you're truly craving, not the relief, but the return, the reconnection to a man who can stand in his own storm without folding. Each time you numb that silence, you bury the invitation to grow through it, not away from it. That call isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it doesn't beg, it waits. It waits for you to put the phone down, to let the screen go black, to sit in a room with no noise and let your thoughts crash like waves. Because only then, only when the surface is still, can you hear what's underneath. Your body may ask for pleasure, but your soul is asking for peace. And peace doesn't come through gratification. It comes through groundedness, through discipline, through being able to say, I am here, I feel this, and I won't run. That kind of man moves differently, breathes differently, commands differently, because he's not avoiding anything, not even himself. You've muted the call for so long it barely speaks anymore, but it's still there, beneath the routine, beneath the click, beneath the need, waiting for you to stop numbing long enough to remember that your silence isn't empty. It's sacred. It's not your enemy. It's your guide, but only if you let it speak. Only if you choose not to run this time. Only if you sit and stay. It doesn't look like destruction. It looks like a man unwinding after a long day. It looks like privacy, autonomy, a quiet release before sleep. No harm, no drama, no noise. But over time, that harmless relief begins to carve something out of you. Not a scar, a silence, a dulling, a gradual self-erasure that leaves no mess. Just the absence of a fire that once lit your eyes. Seneca once said, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire. You run from death as if time were your enemy, but indulge like your days are infinite." That contradiction lives in every man who trades his energy for moments he doesn't even remember. Not because he's wicked, but because he's numb. Because he forgot that life isn't measured in years. It's measured in how present you are inside them. The soul doesn't vanish overnight. It steps back, slowly. Every time you treat your body like a machine built only to consume. Every time you look at pleasure as something owed, not earned. Every time you dull your inner edge instead of facing what cut it. You don't collapse, you dissolve. You don't scream, you fade. Until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've become background noise in your own life. Masturbation isn't immoral, but when it becomes your ritual of retreat, your nightly dissociation, your unspoken way of saying, "I can't sit with myself," it stops being physical. It becomes existential. It changes your relationship with stillness, with power, with presence. The man who touches himself to feel better is not the same as the man who sits with his discomfort until it reveals him. You start forgetting what it feels like to wait, to want, to hunger. Not because those instincts are gone, but because you've numbed them into irrelevance. And without hunger, there's no pursuit. Without pursuit, there's no purpose. Without purpose, there's no man. Just a routine. A body that functions. A voice that speaks. A soul that watches silently from the corner, waiting for you to come back. This kind of erosion doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't shout. But one day, you'll feel it. In the way you stop initiating. In the way you hesitate when opportunity knocks. In the way you lower your voice. Not out of peace, but because you forgot what it sounds like when it carries weight. That's not peace. That's slow erasure. And if you don't stop it, it becomes your story. Not a fall, not a collapse. Just a quiet disappearance. In plain sight. Zeno didn't discover philosophy through comfort. He found it in the wreckage. After he lost everything, after his ship sank and his illusions went with it, he stood there with nothing left to protect him from the silence and began to listen, not to others, but to the voice inside he had ignored for too long. That's where the real path begins. Not with motivation, not with a plan, but with a moment of stillness when the noise falls away and something true finally rises. That's where you are now. Maybe not visibly wrecked, but inwardly worn, quietly fragmented. You've carried the habit long enough to know it doesn't satisfy, long enough to feel that it's not about desire anymore. It's about something deeper, something harder to face. You tied the rope around your own voice, silenced your own call, not out of weakness, but because you forgot what that voice sounded like. It was easier to follow routine, to give in, to release, than to sit in the mirror of your own stillness and ask yourself why. Epictetus taught that self-mastery isn't the suppression of desire, it's the redirection of it. The capacity to take that fire and use it to build, not burn. To move it towards something sacred, something that lasts. Every man has fire, but few learn how to carry it without spilling. That's what abstinence is for. Not for purity, but for clarity. For remembering what your desire was made to protect, not destroy. Masturbation, in its compulsive form, is like drinking salt water. You're thirsty. You reach for what's available. It feels like relief. Until it doesn't. The more you consume, the more dehydrated you become. Not physically, but spiritually. You're not just draining energy, you're draining trust. In yourself, in your own ability to hold tension without escaping it. And every time you do, the voice gets fainter. The silence becomes harder to bear. But you're not broken. You never were. You were just trying to survive with tools that numbed more than they healed. And now the real challenge begins. Not with blame, not with shame, but with a question. A quiet test of presence. Can you sit in a room with no distractions and still feel like you are enough? No screens, no noise, no release. Just breath, just gravity, just you. Because if you can learn to stay, then the rope unravels. The voice returns, and the man you were meant to be begins to rise. Not with noise, but with stillness. Not with anger, but with quiet weight. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. The kind that remembers and refuses to forget again.